long before the word democracy became a political ideal across the world. It was a fragile experiment struggling to survive in a small Greek city-state called Athens, surrounded by rival powers, threatened by internal division, and overshadowed by the largest empire the world had ever seen. Athens stood on the edge of extinction. In the year 490 BCE, on a narrow plain near the Aegean Sea, the fate of Greek freedom would be decided in a single, improbable battle. This was the Battle of Marathon. To understand why Marathon mattered, we must first understand the world that existed before it. In the late 6th century BCE, the Persian Empire dominated the known world. Under kings like Cyrus the Great and Darius I, Persia had expanded from Central Asia to Egypt, from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean. It was not merely large. It was organized, wealthy, and efficient. Persia ruled through a system of satrapies, local governors who collected taxes, enforced law, and maintained order under the authority of the great king. To the Persians, Greece was small, divided, and insignificant. The Greek world was not a nation but a collection of independent city-states, often at war with one another. Athens, Sparta, Corinth. Thebes each had its own laws, culture, and ambitions. They shared language and religion, but unity was rare and temporary. Yet Greece occupied a strategic position. The Ionian Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor had already fallen under Persian rule. These cities retained their Greek identity but paid tribute to Persia and were governed by tyrants, loyal to the great king. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and in 499 BCE, those tensions erupted into open rebellion. The Ionian Revolt was the spark that ignited the Persian-Greek conflict. Led by Aristagoras of Miletus, the Greek cities of Ionia rose against Persian authority. They burned Sardis, the regional Persian capital, an act that shocked the empire. Though the revolt was ultimately crushed, it left a deep impression on King Darius. He reportedly ordered a servant to remind him daily, "Master, remember the Athenians." Athens had sent ships and soldiers to support the Ionian rebels. From the Persian perspective, this was an unforgivable insult. Athens was no longer a distant curiosity, it was an enemy. Darius resolved to punish Athens and assert Persian dominance over mainland Greece. But this was not merely revenge, it was strategy. If Greece were left independent, it could inspire further revolts among Greek subjects of the empire. Persia did not tolerate instability on its western frontier. The first Persian expedition against Greece, led by Mardonius in 490 BCE, failed due to storms and resistance in Thrace. But Darius did not abandon his goal. 2 years later, he launched a second invasion, this time by sea. The Persian force was commanded by Datis and Artapernes, experienced generals entrusted with a clear mission: subdue Athens and Eretria, install friendly governments, and bring Greece firmly under Persian control. The fleet crossed the Aegean, conquering islands along the way. Eretria was besieged, captured, and destroyed. Its population was enslaved and deported deep into the Persian Empire. Athens was next. When news reached Athens that the Persians had landed at Marathon, panic spread through the city. Marathon lay only about 26 miles from Athens. The Persians had chosen their landing site carefully. The plain of Marathon was flat, ideal for cavalry, and close enough to threaten the city quickly. The Athenians faced a grim reality. They were vastly outnumbered. Persian forces may have numbered between 20,000 and 30,000 men, possibly more, including infantry, archers, and cavalry. Athens could muster only around 10,000 hoplites, heavily armed citizen soldiers. They were joined by about 1,000 Plataeans, loyal allies who chose to stand with Athens despite the danger. Athens had no standing army in the modern sense. Its soldiers were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who trained part-time and fought when called. Yet these men were motivated by something rare in the ancient world. They were fighting not for a king, not for plunder, but for their own political system. Athens had recently overthrown tyranny and established a form of democracy. The Persian victory would mean the end of that experiment. Leadership in Athens was divided among 10 generals, elected annually. Among them was Miltiades, a man with unique experience. He had lived under Persian rule in the Chersonese and understood Persian tactics, strengths, and weaknesses. Miltiades believed that delay would doom Athens. The Persians could re-embark their troops, sail directly to Athens, and capture the city while the army was away. Others argued for caution. They wanted to wait for Sparta. Sparta was the greatest military power in Greece. Its warriors were professional soldiers trained from childhood. Athens sent a runner, Phidippides, to Sparta to request immediate aid. According to tradition, he ran nearly 150 miles in 2 days, a feat that later inspired the modern marathon. The Spartans agreed to help, but not immediately. A religious festival prevented them from marching until the full moon. Athens was on its own. The Athenian army marched to Marathon and took position on the hills, overlooking the plain. They were outmatched in numbers and cavalry, but they had advantages. Hoplites fought in tight formations called phalanxes, protected by heavy shields, bronze helmets, breastplates, and long spears. Persian infantry, by contrast, wore lighter armor and relied heavily on archery. The battlefield itself shaped the coming clash. Marshes protected the Athenian flanks, limiting Persian cavalry movement. The hills gave the Greeks defensive positions, yet remaining passive would only allow the Persians to dictate the battle. Miltiades argued for immediate attack. According to later accounts, the decision to fight was controversial and narrowly approved, but once made, it was decisive. The Athenians would attack first. At dawn, the Greek army formed up for battle. Miltiades arranged his forces in an unusual way. He strengthened the wings and deliberately weakened the center. This was a risky maneuver. A collapse in the center could mean total defeat. But Miltiades anticipated Persian tactics. He expected the Persians to push hardest at the center, where their numbers were greatest. When the signal was given, the Athenian line advanced not at a walk but at a run. This was unprecedented. For nearly a mile, heavily armored hoplites charged toward the Persian line. The reason was simple and deadly practical. Persian archers were lethal at range. By closing the distance quickly, the Greeks minimized casualties from arrows. The Persians were stunned. They had never seen such an attack. When the lines met, the battle turned brutal. Bronze shields crashed into wicker shields. Spears stabbed through linen armor. The Persian center pushed back the weaker Greek center, just as Miltiades had predicted. But on the wings, the heavily reinforced Greek flanks smashed through Persian troops. Then the Athenians did something extraordinary. Instead of pursuing fleeing enemies, the Greek wings turned inward, attacking the Persian center from both sides. The Persian line collapsed. Panic spread. Soldiers fled toward their ships. Many drowned in the marshes. The Athenians pursued relentlessly, capturing ships and killing thousands. According to Herodotus, the Persians lost around 6,400 men. The Greeks lost only 192 Athenians and 11 Plataeans. The numbers may not be exact, but the outcome is clear. Against overwhelming odds, Athens had won a decisive victory. The battle did not end at Marathon. The Athenians realized that the Persian fleet could still sail directly to Athens. Exhausted but determined, they marched back to the city at top speed. When the Persian ships arrived and saw the Athenian army waiting, they withdrew. Athens was saved. The Battle of Marathon sent shockwaves across Greece. For the first time, the Persian army had been decisively defeated by a Greek force. The myth of Persian invincibility was shattered. Confidence spread among the Greek city-states. If Athens could win, then Persia could be resisted. For Persia, Marathon was a setback, not a catastrophe. Darius planned a larger invasion, but before he could act, he died. The task fell to his son, Xerxes. For Athens, Marathon became legend. Fallen soldiers were buried on the battlefield, an honor usually reserved for kings. Monuments were raised. Stories were told and retold. Marathon became a symbol of courage, unity, and resistance. More than that, it became a turning point in world history. Had Persia won at Marathon, Athens would likely have been destroyed or turned into a puppet state. Democracy might have vanished in its infancy. Greek culture, philosophy, and political thought might never have developed as they did. The intellectual foundations of Western civilization would have been profoundly altered. Marathon was not the end of the Persian wars, but it was the moment when history changed direction, and it began with a decision to run forward instead of retreat. The Persian expedition that sailed across the Aegean was not a reckless gamble. It was a calculated move by an empire that had already subdued vast territories, stretching from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean. Darius I, the King of Kings, ruled an empire unlike anything the Greek world had ever seen. His resources were immense, his armies multinational, his administrative system highly organized. From the Persian perspective, Greece was a fractured land of quarreling city-states, incapable of united resistance. Yet Marathon would prove that empires often underestimate smaller enemies. The Persian force that landed at Marathon consisted of infantry, archers, cavalry, and support units. While ancient sources differ, modern historians estimate the Persian army numbered between 20 and 25,000 men. They were professionals, many drawn from conquered peoples, trained to fight in the Persian style, lightly armored, relying on speed, missile fire, and mobility. Their objective was simple: defeat the Athenian army, restore the exiled tyrant Hippias to power, and turn Athens into a loyal subject state. From there, the rest of Greece would fall in time. Athens, meanwhile, faced an existential crisis. The city had only recently overthrown tyranny and established a fragile form of democracy. Many Athenians feared that defeat would not merely mean occupation, but the destruction of their political system and the enslavement of their citizens. The Athenian army was small by comparison. Estimates place their force at around 10,000 hoplites. They were heavy infantry, citizens who supplied their own armor, bronze helmets, breastplates, greaves, large round shields, and long spears. They fought not as individuals, but as a tightly packed formation known as the phalanx. Unlike the Persians, the Athenians lacked cavalry and archers. Their strength lay in discipline, cohesion, and the sheer physical power of armored men advancing shoulder to shoulder. Athens did not stand alone. A small contingent of approximately 1,000 hoplites arrived from the city of Plataea, a loyal ally that chose to stand with Athens despite the overwhelming odds. Their presence would later be remembered as a symbol of Greek unity. The Athenians also sent a desperate message to Sparta, the most powerful military state in Greece. A professional runner named Phidippides was dispatched, running over 200 kilometers across rugged terrain to request Spartan aid. According to tradition, he reached Sparta in 2 days. The Spartans listened but refused immediate help. A religious festival prevented them from marching until the full moon. Athens would have to face Persia alone. As the Persian army established its camp near Marathon, days passed without battle. Both sides hesitated. The Persians may have been waiting for internal division in Athens, or for their cavalry to maneuver more effectively. The Athenians, aware of their numerical disadvantage, were cautious. They positioned their army in the foothills overlooking the plain, blocking the Persians from advancing inland. Command of the Athenian forces rested with 10 generals, one from each tribe, and a polemarch named Callimachus, who held the deciding vote in military matters. Among the generals was Miltiades, a man with first-hand experience of Persian warfare. He had once served under Persian authority in the Thracian Chersonese and understood their tactics. Miltiades argued forcefully for immediate attack. He warned that delay favored Persia. The longer the Athenians waited, the greater the chance of betrayal within the city or the arrival of Persian cavalry reinforcements. He emphasized that Greek hoplites, if used aggressively, could shatter the lighter Persian infantry. The decision was not unanimous. Some generals feared disaster, others believed defense was safer. Ultimately, Callimachus cast the deciding vote in favor of Miltiades. The Athenians would attack. On the morning of the battle, the Greek army descended from the hills onto the Marathon plain. Miltiades arranged the phalanx in an unconventional way. He deliberately weakened the center of the formation and reinforced both wings. This was a calculated risk designed to counter the Persians' numerical advantage. When the Greeks advanced, they did something unprecedented. They ran, covering the final distance at a sprint. The hoplites closed the gap before Persian archers could unleash devastating volleys. Bronze armor clashed with wicker shields. Spears smashed into lighter Persian defenses. The impact was catastrophic for the Persian front lines. As Miltiades had predicted, the Persian center pushed back the thinner Greek center, believing victory was at hand. But on the wings, the reinforced Greek flanks crushed their opponents. Then, in a decisive maneuver, the wings turned inward, encircling the Persian center. What followed was not an orderly retreat, but a rout. Persian soldiers fled toward their ships, pursued relentlessly by Greek hoplites. Many drowned in the marshes near the battlefield. Others were cut down as they tried to escape. The Greeks even captured several Persian ships, an astonishing achievement for a citizen militia. According to ancient accounts, approximately 6,400 Persians were killed, compared to only 190 to Athenians. While these numbers may be exaggerated, there is no doubt the Persian losses were severe and the Greek victory overwhelming. Among the fallen Greeks was Callimachus, the man whose vote had determined the battle. He died defending the captured ships, becoming a martyr to Athenian democracy. The Persian commanders, shocked by defeat, withdrew. But the danger was not over. The Persian fleet attempted a bold maneuver, sailing around Cape Sunion. They aimed to attack Athens directly while its army was still at Marathon. If successful, the city would fall undefended. When news reached the Athenians, they performed another astonishing feat. Exhausted, blooded, still wearing their armor, they marched the 40 kilometers back to Athens at incredible speed. When the Persian fleet arrived, they saw hoplites lined up on the shore, ready to fight again. The Persians turned away. Athens was saved. The Battle of Marathon was far more than a military victory. It shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. It proved that disciplined citizen soldiers could defeat a massive imperial force. It gave Athens confidence in its political system and military strength. In the years that followed, Marathon became legend. It was celebrated in poetry, art, and public memory. The Athenians built monuments to the fallen and honored the Plataeans for their loyalty. The idea that free citizens could stand against tyranny became a central theme of Greek identity. But the Persian threat did not vanish. Darius began planning revenge only to die before it could be carried out. His son Xerxes would return a decade later with a far larger army, leading to the epic battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Marathon, however, was the beginning. It marked the moment when history could have taken a very different path. Had the Persians won, Greek democracy might never have survived. Western political thought, philosophy, and culture would have developed under imperial domination. The world as we know it might not exist. The battle also reshaped warfare. It demonstrated the effectiveness of heavy infantry against missile-based armies. It showed the power of tactical innovation over numerical superiority. These lessons would echo through military history for centuries. Even today, Marathon endures not only as a place but as an idea. The concept of pushing beyond human limits, of running toward danger rather than away from it, of standing against overwhelming odds, all trace their symbolic roots back to that dusty plain in 490 BCE. This was not just a battle, it was a turning point in human history. The psychological impact of the earlier campaigns was now fully visible. Cities began to surrender without resistance, not because Alexander demanded it, but because his reputation arrived before his army. Messengers carried stories of shattered Persian forces, of disciplined Macedonian phalanxes advancing like iron walls, and of a young king who led charges himself, bleeding alongside his men. Fear spread faster than armies ever could, yet Alexander did not rely on fear alone. He understood politics as deeply as warfare. In conquered territories, he often preserved local administrations, respected religious traditions, and portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the rightful successor to Persian authority. This approach reduced rebellion and secured supply lines across vast distances. Each city became not merely occupied land, but a functioning node within his expanding empire. The Persian response, however, did not end. Darius III, though defeated, was not destroyed. He fled eastward, attempting to gather fresh forces from the inner regions of the empire. Persia was enormous, and its heartlands still possessed manpower, resources, and loyalty. For Alexander, the war was far from over. The pursuit of Darius became a defining phase of the campaign. It was no longer just a war between armies. It became a race across deserts, mountains, and hostile terrain. Alexander pushed his troops beyond what many thought humanly possible. Forced marches under burning sun, minimal supplies, and relentless pace tested the limits of endurance. Soldiers collapsed, horses died, yet the army continued forward, driven by discipline, loyalty, and the magnetism of their leader. When Alexander finally caught up to Darius's trail, he did not find a Persian king ready for battle. Instead, he found chaos. Darius had been betrayed by his own satraps, nobles who believed the war was lost and sought to save themselves. The great king of Persia was captured, wounded, and left to die in a remote region, abandoned by those he once commanded. When Alexander arrived, Darius was already dead. The symbolic significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The fall of Darius did not merely end a reign. It marked the collapse of a world order that had existed for over 2 centuries. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, once the greatest superpower on earth, no longer had a king. Its administrative structure remained. Its people remained, but its central authority was gone. Alexander treated Darius's body with respect. He ordered a royal burial according to Persian custom, presenting himself not as a destroyer of Persia, but as its inheritor. This gesture was strategic. By honoring Darius, Alexander legitimized his own rule in the eyes of Persian elites and populations alike. Yet legitimacy did not guarantee peace. The eastern provinces of the former empire erupted into resistance. Bactria, Sogdiana, and other regions were home to hardened warriors accustomed to guerrilla warfare. Unlike the pitched battles of the West, these conflicts were brutal, prolonged, and psychologically draining. Ambushes, assassinations, and sudden revolts became common. Alexander's army faced an enemy that refused to fight on open ground. This phase of the campaign transformed Alexander. The idealistic conqueror of earlier years became a hardened ruler, increasingly intolerant of dissent. Rebellions were crushed with severity. Entire settlements were destroyed as warnings. The war shifted from glorious conquest to grim pacification. At the same time, Alexander began to change culturally. He adopted Persian dress, incorporated Persian nobles into his court, and demanded rituals that many Macedonians viewed as foreign and humiliating. These actions created tension within his own ranks. Veterans who had followed him from Greece felt alienated. They had conquered Persia, yet now their king seemed to be becoming Persian himself. This internal conflict would become as dangerous as any external enemy. Despite resistance, Alexander pressed onward. His ambition no longer seemed to have limits. He crossed into India, pushing his army into lands unknown to the Greek world. The battles there were unlike anything they had experienced before. War elephants shattered formations. Monsoon rains turned fields into swamps. The climate itself became an adversary. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, Alexander faced King Paris, a formidable ruler who commanded a powerful force. The battle was tactically brilliant but costly. Although Alexander emerged victorious, the toll on his army was immense. For the first time, his soldiers openly resisted further advance. They had reached the edge of the known world, and they refused to go farther. Alexander argued, pleaded, and raged, but the decision was final. His army would not continue east. The conqueror, who had never been defeated, was now constrained not by enemies, but by the limits of human endurance and loyalty. The return journey was catastrophic. The crossing of the Jedrosian Desert claimed thousands of lives. Hunger, thirst, and heat killed more soldiers than any battle. It was a silent punishment for ambition, a reminder that nature could humble even the greatest conqueror. When Alexander finally returned to Babylon, he He was still young, still powerful, but profoundly changed. His empire stretched from Greece to India, yet it was fragile, held together by his personal authority alone. There was no clear system of succession, no stable administrative unity, no shared identity binding its diverse peoples together. Then, suddenly, Alexander fell ill. The circumstances of his death remain one of history's greatest mysteries. Fever, poisoning, exhaustion, no explanation has ever been proven. At just 32 years old, the man who had conquered the known world was gone. Without Alexander, his empire shattered almost immediately. Generals turned on one another. Provinces declared independence. Decades of wars followed as former allies fought to claim fragments of his legacy. The empire that had risen with unmatched speed collapsed just as quickly, yet the impact of Alexander's conquests endured. Greek language, culture, and ideas spread across 3 continents. Cities he founded became centers of learning and trade. The fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions gave birth to the Hellenistic world, shaping science, philosophy, art, and governance for centuries. The war that began as a campaign against Persia ultimately reshaped civilization itself. Alexander did not merely defeat an empire, he altered the course of history, and the echoes of that transformation still resonate today. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of Marathon marked a turning point, not only for Athens, but for the entire Greek world. What appeared to be a localized, military clash between a small coalition of Greek city-states and the massive Persian Empire quickly transformed into a defining moment in Western history. The Persian army, stunned by its defeat, retreated to its ships. Many soldiers drowned in the marshes near Marathon as they fled in panic. The Athenians captured several Persian vessels, further humiliating an empire that had never before faced such resistance from a comparatively insignificant enemy. Yet the danger was far from over. The Persian fleet did not sail directly back to Asia. Instead, it attempted a daring maneuver sailing around Cape Sunion toward Athens itself. The goal was simple: strike the city while its army was still exhausted on the battlefield. What followed became one of the most legendary episodes in military history. Despite having just fought and won an exhausting battle, the Athenian hoplites marched back to Athens immediately, carrying heavy armor, shields, and weapons. They covered nearly 26 miles in a matter of hours. When the Persian fleet arrived, it found the Athenian army already formed and ready to defend the city. Seeing no opportunity for victory, the Persians withdrew. Athens had survived. This moment cannot be overstated. Had Athens fallen, Greek resistance may have collapsed entirely. Democracy, philosophy, drama, and much of what would later define Western civilization might never have existed in the form we know today. The psychological impact of Marathon was immense. For the first time, the Persians were not merely delayed or resisted, they were decisively defeated in open battle. The myth of Persian invincibility was shattered. Greek confidence soared. Small city-states realized that unity, discipline, and strategy could overcome even the largest empire on earth. For Athens specifically, Marathon became a cornerstone of its identity. The victory strengthened democratic ideals and reinforced the belief that free citizens, fighting for their homeland, could outperform professional imperial armies. Miltiades, the general who had orchestrated the battle plan, was initially celebrated as a hero. However, Athenian politics were unforgiving. Not long after Marathon, he fell out of favor due to a failed military expedition and died in disgrace. His fate served as a reminder that Athens rewarded success but never forgot failure. The legacy of the battle extended far beyond individual lives. The Persian Empire did not forget Marathon. Darius began planning a far greater invasion to punish the Greeks, but his death delayed these plans. His son, Xerxes I, would later launch one of the largest invasions in ancient history, leading to battles such as Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Marathon was not the end of the Greco-Persian Wars, it was the beginning. Yet, without Marathon, the later Greek victories might never have been possible. The battle influenced military tactics for centuries. The hoplite phalanx demonstrated the effectiveness of heavy infantry fighting in disciplined formations. The use of terrain, psychological warfare, and unconventional engagement strategies became case studies for future commanders. Even the concept of citizen soldiers defending their homeland gained new prestige. The legend of the marathon runner also emerged from this event. According to later tradition, a messenger ran from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory before collapsing and dying from exhaustion. While historians debate the accuracy of this story, its symbolism endured. Today, the modern marathon race exists because of this legend, a reminder of endurance, sacrifice, and duty. Culturally, marathon became sacred ground. The fallen Athenians were buried on the battlefield rather than returned home, an extraordinary honor. Their burial mound still stands today, a silent monument to one of history's most influential battles. For the Greeks, Marathon was proof that freedom was worth defending, even against overwhelming odds. For the Persians, it was a lesson in underestimating small but determined enemies. For the world, it marked the moment when the course of history shifted subtly, but permanently. The Battle of Marathon was not the largest battle ever fought. It was not the bloodiest, but it may have been one of the most important, because on that plain in 490 BCE, a group of free citizens chose to stand their ground, and in doing so, they changed the future of civilization.